Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. Story inspired by Paul Jutras. Missy didn't know what was more scary, being alone or being in the dark basement. Both weren't very appealing anyway. Then she noticed a hissing sound, and she realized she wasn't so alone. She moved the flashlight beam away from the fuse box and screamed in horror when she saw the pale face of a vampire. It covered its face, screamed in pain, and moved back into the shadows. Its saliva ran down its teeth. Its acidity ate through the cement floor like it was paper. She could see that the red glow in his eyes was getting closer to him. She ran across the room quickly. Missy started to go up the stairs, but two hands grabbed her from below. She could do nothing but scream as she was pulled down into the dark. Mike got out of bed and opened his eyes. It took him a minute, with his heart beating like a drum, to realize that it was just a dream and that he wasn't really the woman he wished he was. His hand shook as it moved across the blanket. When it reached a vampire comic book, it stopped. On the book's cover, there was a picture of a man looking at the full moon through the branches of a swamp and seeing a vampire in the sky. Man, Mike said to himself, that's the last time I'll read this before bed. He put his head on the pillow and slid back under the blanket. When he opened his green eyes, he saw a shadow moving across the white ceiling. When Mike heard a truck coming to a stop, he could still see the ghostly white face and the bloody teeth. What on earth could that be? He asked himself. He kicked off the blanket, got out of bed, and looked out the window of his room. The moving truck next door was pulling into the driveway. He wondered, who would be moving in at 2 a.m? What are they getting out of the moving van? It seems like a grave. Mike got a better look and saw that he was right. He gasped, "A coffin! Oh no!" At first, there was no sound in the house. But then the light in the hall turned on and Mike's dad burst in. He shouted, "Hey, what's going on?" Mike wasn't able to move. He was speechless. He just looked out the window again. He felt like he was doomed. Mike's mom ran over and put her arms around him. She could see that her son was afraid in his eyes. She asked him, "Are you okay?" Mike said, "I don't know," and walked over to the window. "Vampires, Mom! The house next door is being taken over by vampires!" He said this as his father shook his head and thought that the stories he liked to read were bad for him. "What's wrong with you?" Mrs. Sherman asked for it. "Can't you tell he had a bad dream?" When Mike got up in the morning, he kicked off the blankets and put on a pair of torn jeans and a pink sleeveless top over his corset. His father made fun of him all the time about the vampire stuff in his room, from movie posters to books, more so because of the way he dresses. "It's time for breakfast," Mrs. Sherman chirped as Mike went downstairs to the kitchen. His mother was sitting at the table while his father read the paper. "Have you heard about the wonderful news?" As Mrs. Sherman took a sip of her coffee, she said, "The house next door has been bought. They have a daughter the same age as you. New people around." Mike froze. When he thought about the people he saw moving, he realized that it wasn't part of his dream. As he looked out the window, his mother gave him a suspicious look. A girl with dark hair stood in front and dribbled a basketball. She was wearing a red dress with white spots, tan nylons, and clogs. He told himself, "Remember that vampires don't go out in the daytime." His dad had a teasing grin on his face as he drank his orange juice. "Why don't you make some friends?" Mike shrugged. "I suppose." After his nightmare, he didn't want to say how he felt about going next door. He also knew that his dad was right about vampires and the sun. Maybe she'd like a drink. Mike took 2 sodas out of the fridge and went outside. The new girl made a basket while he watched. "Hello," Mike said. "I came to welcome you to the neighborhood and see if you needed someone to show you around." A soda was opened by the girl. Mike gave himself a smile and brushed his long hair off his shoulder. "My name is Mike, but most people call me Missy. Last night, your family sure moved in late. I woke up because of the moving truck." Sarah rose. Sarah took Mike's hand. "My dad started working the night shift last night and needed today to sleep. Aren't you a little too dressed up for summer vacation?" Mike asked, noticing how nice the dress looked. Moving around the court like that must be hard. What's wrong with the way I dress? Nothing. That looks great on you. You look good too. Sarah smiled and said that she agreed. Missy, I really like your hair. I have no idea what to do with mine. Mike felt all his stress melt away as the two talked about how to look good. Sarah's house had a voice calling out and a window. Can you be quiet? Mrs. Ross asked her. You know what your dad is like when he wakes up in the middle of the day? Mike gave a head shake. Would you want to come to my house? Maybe we can try something with your hair. Sarah has to come in and finish her breakfast, Mrs. Ross said. She can go outside and play when she's done. Mike laughed. He remembered that his own breakfast was ready for him. Most likely his mother kept his breakfast warm for him. Catch up with you later, he told his new friend. Perhaps we can take a bike ride around town later. Mike went through the kitchen door after cutting across the lawn. When he sat down to eat breakfast, his mother had already cleaned off his dad's plate. His mother asked, How are our new neighbors? Mike said, They're normal enough. Mike finished eating and went to Sarah's house. He stood outside until Sarah took her bike out of the garage. Sarah walked over to him with the bike. Ready? Where do you first want to go? Mike asked. Sarah didn't say anything. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, Sarah quickly replied. Let's get going so we don't wake up my father. She got on her bike and went down the street. Why are you so worried about waking up your dad? Your mother seemed to be worried too, he asked while they rode on their bikes. You don't know my father, Sarah told her. He can be a real monster if you wake him up during the day. Mike got a suspicious look on his face. You know more than what you're telling, Mike said, pedaling as Sarah turned away. He kept his eyes on the road and asked, Where should we go first? How about going to the arcade? Mike said as he turned down a street and rode toward a barn that had been remodeled into an arcade. Pinball and video game lights shone on the outside of the arcade. He remembered that a year ago it had been dark, empty, and smelled musty. We're here. Huh? Mike was caught off guard. When he turned back to Sarah, she was no longer there. Where'd you go? Sarah! He turned around on his bike and drove back to Sarah's house. How did she disappear? He wondered. When Mike pulled into Sarah's driveway, he did one turn around it and then went to Sarah's house. Mike found Sarah's house dark and quiet when he got there. It seemed like Sarah's family had just left. Sarah! Mike got off his bike and dropped it in the driveway. Are you there? Hey! Mike called out again and ran to the door with the screen. When he opened the screen, each knock on the thick oak door made it sound like it was echoing. Is anyone at home? Mike walked up to a window and looked inside. It didn't look like anyone lived there. Mike was scared to death when the front door opened on its own. He was so scared that he ran home without even stopping to look back. If he had looked back, he would have seen a man picking up his bike in the distance. He ran up to his room in a panic and looked out his window at Sarah's house. He saw that his bike was gone and got the feeling that someone was watching him. Missy, did you forget your bike? Mrs. Sherman came into his room to scold him. I've already told you not to treat it carelessly. Mike said, I'm sorry, Mom, even though he knew it didn't matter to her that he thought the new neighbors had taken it. That bike was very expensive, Mrs. Sherman made him remember. I'm counting on you to get it back. Okay. When Mike went back to the window, he saw Sarah riding her bike in her driveway. She came from where? Mike went outside after pushing past her mother. I'm gonna go get my bike back now, Mom! Mike yelled and ran across the driveway to Sarah. Hey, where have you been? Mike saw Sarah's eyes get narrow as she looked at him. Have you seen my bike? He asked. Dad saw your bike and took it inside. Mike put his hands together in prayer to get his bike back, and Sarah said, He was mad at you for waking him up. Sarah, please, Mike said. Just let me get my bike. If I don't bring it back, my parents will be mad. You have no idea how dangerous that is. Sarah looked at him in a strange way. I'll get it for you if you really want it back. Mike waited on the front porch as Sarah went inside. Mike remembered how empty the downstairs was and wondered if there was any furniture upstairs. Every curtain was closed to keep the sun from coming in. Mike smiled and crinkled his eyes as Sarah walked his bike outside and down the porch steps. Mike said, thanks, as he got on his bike and saw his mother walking. She had a basket of fruit in her hand and rang their doorbell. The door opened up and she immediately said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I want you to know that your family is always welcome to visit." But before she could finish, she stopped and looked. 2 girls opened the door. Mike saw it too and wondered, who is that other girl? Where is the dad? Mrs. Ross thanked Mike's mom and pointed the girl next to her. "This is my husband." "Nice to meet you," Mr. Ross answered. Mike overheard their conversation. It all made sense now. He was a crossdresser too. Mike wondered, is that the reason everything was so dark and empty? Maybe he is just scared of people seeing him, and that's why he is out at night. Mrs. Sherman waved at Mike to come over. "Hey, Mike, I found someone with the same hobby as yours." She smiled. "Meet Mr. Ross. He likes cross-dressing too, just like you. Maybe you both can share your hobby. Wouldn't that be cool?" Mike smiled and thought, "I can't believe I thought he was a vampire. What a relief." Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.